Sure.
Do we have Phoebe and Jill this morning?
Jill, no, Phoebe is going to join us. Jill's sick, but she's going to come in the afternoon. So I went ahead and started the recording, and while we perfect, thank you. Just to kick our meeting off, I want to welcome everybody to the October 17th, 2024 Seattle Design Commission meeting. All of our meetings are being recorded through MS Teams, which we post on our website at a later date. There are three items today. The first item from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. is the conclusion of the Commission's review of the schematic design phase for Memorial Stadium. The review today will pick up from our October 3rd review, and we'll start with deliberation and then Commission taking an action. From 10 until 10:30, we'll have Commission business, including a 2-minute earthquake drill for the Great Shakeout. Starting at 10:30 until noon, we'll be looking at the Upper Post Sky Bridge for the Transforming Age community on First Hill. And then from 1 to 4 p.m., we will be looking at the first opportunity to look at updated designs to State Route 520's Portage Bay Bridge and Roanoke Lid, following the RFP award to Skanska, AECOM, and their partners, development partners. Why don't we go ahead and start with introductions in the room, and then we'll go online with commissioners and then with presenters. Zubin, could you start us off?
Yeah, Zubin Rao, Architecture Commissioner.
Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin and I'm the Get Engaged Commissioner.
Good morning, Molly Spitalnik. I'm the Urban Design Commissioner.
And then Kate and Kevin, please.
Hi, I'm Kate Clark. I'm the Art Commissioner.
Good morning. I'm Kevin O'Neill. I'm the Transportation Planning Commissioner and Vice Chair.
And we've been joined. I'm going to take the liberty to.
Hi guys, Brian Markham, Engineering Chair.
I think Phoebe's joined.
Yes, sir.
I'm also here. I just joined. Phoebe Bogart, Landscape Architect Commissioner.
Great. Thank you, Phoebe. David, do you want to start with introductions of your team?
Yeah, good morning. David Kunselman, City of Seattle Project Director. I'll hand it over to Lance Lopes.
Yeah, and Lance Lopes with Memorial Stadium Redevelopment Group. And we have our architecture team here, Angie from Generator Studio, and John Liams is also with Generator Studio. I believe that's everybody that's on from our side. Brad, I think you're on, right, from SPS?
Yes, I am. Yep, Brad Tong with SOJ for Seattle Public Schools.
Excellent. So at our last meeting, again, I sort of summarized this at the beginning of the meeting, we were able to get through commissioner questions. We had run out of time that day. So the purpose of our meeting from 9 until 10, which Zubin Rao will be leading us on, is to deliberate over the materials that you were presented in, and as we do with all of our presentations, we develop a list of items that we forward to the person taking the action to focus the discussions, the deliberations, and then finally the action today. Unless there's anything else, I'm going to just throw it to you, Ruben.
Sure. Yeah. So I think, as Michael said, questions are kind of already completed. So what we've typically been doing recently, I think, is kind of organizing our discussion around topics rather than kind of going person by person. So I think some of the topics we had teed up before last time's presentation were, kind of the transition spaces between the stadium and the Seattle Center, kind of on all different sides. So landscape and architecture elements. There were questions about the kind of curvilinear forms versus the rectilinear forms. We talked about programming around the restroom and concession structures. We talked about art integration, both kind of on the perimeter as well as within the stadium. Last time, questions came up about that from Kate. We also talked about the characteristics of the North Plaza area that intersects August Wilson Way, and then how seat steps are designed and oriented to areas of pedestrian movement and gathering. I are there any other kind of like bigger topics that you guys want to discuss?
Stakeholder involvement.
Stakeholder involvement, right? Thanks.
Yeah, and Zoom, and I think there were some questions last time from some of us about sort of transportation access to the stadium, et cetera. So
Yep, transportation
great to-
access, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Wendy, I think I'm looking at the older, the original action sheet. So I didn't have those other things added to the same document. So was I missing anything else there? No? Okay, so yeah, why don't we start with the kind of just the perimeter and transition spaces around the stadium. Does anyone want to start there?
I can lead us off if you want.
Sure.
To break the ice.
Yeah.
I love the fountain. I think it's the center of the center. And I think we should figure out a way to not turn our back on it. It seems like we're putting a lot of trees and buildings, and I think there was a comment previously about how perhaps the high schools don't want the sight lines into the stadium. But I think that can be addressed without physical huge blockages and cutting the stadium off from the Seattle Center itself.
So is that what did we hear that they didn't want the sightlines or that they wanted the safety while you had visual access, they wanted the safety components of being?
I heard two things, and that's a good point of clarification, right? Like
Mhm.
one of them is safety while they're in a stadium space, but they distinctly said, we don't want to see the field so that people have to buy the tickets.
Mm-hmm. But not visual blockage from kind of the gathering spaces within the upper portion of the stadium.
That's what I was thinking could be a better solution if you find a way to block the field with the back row of the seating or something low,
Mhm.
but you still can,
Have visual permeability.
yeah. I just think the sunken dish stadium is such a good idea
Mhm.
to allow it to become part of the Seattle Center landscape.
Mhm.
And then we put a bunch of buildings in the way. It sort of seems like we had such a purity of thought, and then one comment has derailed that. Or maybe two. Sorry.
Yeah, because I think from my perspective, the ideal nature of what the architecture is intending to do and how it benefits the public realm is that it's creating this visual permeability while creating physical security. And it seems like that is the goal of the team. That would be what I would want to see. And there's a step where it says, okay, but you don't want people to be gathering outside to watch the game. So you need more discrete solutions that don't negatively impact the visibility to activity inside, but maybe don't give you a full view of a field so that you're seeing a full game occur.
And that's exactly the solution that we have on the south side is it's full permeable, a nice fence that's not blocking of views, but the last row of seats blocks the field view. And so you see the full activation of the stadium, you see the full concourses. It looks like a bigger volume. You really get the energy of the stadium, but you don't specifically see the game.
Mhm.
And so it gets you the safety, it gets you the openness, it gets you the transparency and activation, but it blocks the ticketed event, which I think is a very good solution along that south side. Just that we're not doing that same thing on the side that is actually the jewel of the Seattle Center, which is the fountain. And, if we had to turn our backs on one thing, I think the playground and the walkway would be far more preferred than the fountain and the great lawn.
So can I jump in and try to provide a little bit of, I guess, focus on what you're talking about, just so that I can sort of maybe drill down into I think what I think I'm hearing in terms of the specific issue. So I will point out that the corner buildings are essential functions of the facility. Like, in other words, we have to have the restroom and concessions, and putting them at the corners from a access of facility and what have you standpoint, I think is fairly what I'll call essential for the design of the functionality of the building. Where I think that I'm hearing there's concern is what I'll call the fence area that, for example, that protrudes off of the edge of the building along the west side on that berm area where we had proposed landscaping. The fence is going to be there obviously for security of the site and making sure there's an 8-foot fence there to secure the stadium as a stadium. But it's really the treatment of that fence and all of that at least what I'm hearing in particular is of concern to some of you. And that's something that I think we absolutely can look at and figure out if there's a better way, if in fact what I'll call field vision is the issue that we're trying to solve for, because you guys are concerned about it obviously not allowing people to see through the sort of the transparency of the stadium. Hopefully I'm isolating the question a little bit more anyway, at least in my mind, that's what I'm hearing, because obviously the main gate there is going to be open. That's going to be a transparent access point in and through the stadium. But then you get to that fence that goes from the main gate to the concession building on the southwest corner. Seems to be what people have concern about. Is that accurate?
For me, Lance, I think that gets most of the way there. I think the first version of those corner buildings that we saw were more in the corners, and these are more westerly buildings. And so, yes, I think your comment captures it, but I also think that the buildings have extended more to be western buildings than corner buildings.
I'm gonna jump in too. I agree. I think that the permeability is, of the fence is one of the visibility issues. But I think the other question, let me step back really quickly. I noted this when we discussed it a couple of weeks ago. I think the move to raise the topography at that southwest corner is really significant and shouldn't be overlooked, because that was a sunken space. Like, you go to the site right now and it's a hole adjacent the current Memorial Stadium. So by raising that, it definitely tips the scale back to creating like a hugging room, or like a place that's starting to surround the fountain. And I think that's really important and should be noticed. However, I think where part of, like, in addition to the visibility question, and I would agree that should continue to be fleshed out or, eroded more, is just, it does still feel like that central space needs to be better massaged, right? There is this path that's coming down, and I actually really appreciate taking away the canopy and just kind of reorganizing that path and saying, hey, maybe it doesn't need to be straight anymore. So I think those are bold moves to say, that, some of those relationship and that orthogonality could be broken. I think that's smart to investigate that, but I do still feel like there's a resolution missing there between like a very known amazing, amenity of the center, the International Fountain, as this also very strong geometry. And then you've got, you've got the path kind of slicing in, and then it feels like the space to the memorial side does feel still like vestigial space and doesn't feel like there is a strong relationship spatially that doesn't feel here nor there right now still, like it, and I feel like it can happen, right? But it's like, how does that West Entry Plaza really function for the center and for the Memorial Stadium? And it just doesn't feel like it's quite there yet.
Yeah, and related to that, Phoebe, I think when we were looking at all of the programmatic overlays, it felt to me that many of those kind of planned events, or if it were used this way, if it were used this way, often were kind of overflow. Like there were some indicated in the South Overlook lawn, but they kind of flow into the Third Avenue Promenade. And there wasn't, to me, a lot of, when we look at some of those distinct events of distinct sizes, it didn't feel that the space had kind of clear, expandable, flexible boundaries.
Yeah.
Do accommodate those. It felt like those things are pressing into 3 zones or half of a zone.
Yeah.
And so I had trouble with that legibility of how can this be an expandable and contractible room in a way that is truly geared toward those stakeholders who currently program that space.
Yes.
Okay, so, yeah, I mean, I feel like, so if we're going to turn this into one of our recommendations, feels like one of our significant points here. How would we kind of paraphrase that? I think we're talking about basically strengthening the relationship between the fountain and the stadium in some way, right? Or clarifying it maybe, or to use Brian's phrase, not turning your back to it, but also ensuring that there's enough porosity to kind of let that open up as a space. Is that kind of what we're saying?
Yeah, I think that's a good consolidation of people's comments. And I just would like to note that I personally don't take issue with the design of, based off of security concerns expressed from students about needing to make sure that there aren't sight lines into the memorial. I think it's really important to respect that request. There's horrible echoing.
Yeah.
You just need to.
It's Brian's fault.
You need to do something.
Okay, you should be good.
Great. So, to me, I think it's really important to maintain that. I think that in some ways there's a generational divide in that type of thinking, and it's important to listen to the students in that necessity. So for me, I think that west side, in terms of tying the fountain and the memorial, is the part that is that sewing connection, as compared to trying to pierce all the way through into the memorial. And so to me, there's a few kind of vestigial aspects to the site that we see right now with the plantings. I know there's a lot of legacy trees on site that are important to maintain, but I also, if we look where the note says International Fountain, between International Fountain and West Plaza, when we were doing the site visit, there were a lot of kind of scrubby plantings that to me I think we were still trying to maintain some of that. I'm not quite sure, but just to say, I do wonder about, to echo what Molly was bringing up, about the flexibility of maybe extending that West Plaza, making it a little larger. Like, I just wonder what those perimeter spaces are. I'm usually never one to argue for like more hardscape, but I just, in seeing those models for all the various activities that were occurring, it did feel really tight. So I wonder if it's possible to open up that space more. And to that point, for the edge buildings, because I know we were talking about that as well. I wonder, I know there was a big push to kind of have an optimistic interior treatment to the memorial. But that attitude, that value that was expressed in the presentation doesn't necessarily feel reflected with the exterior material choices of the cinder block. And so in terms of that, going back to that discussion of porosity, I know you were quoting from the earlier site plan and vision for this area. Some of that language was, noted when blank walls are unavoidable, consider treatments such as a green screen or art. And so I just wonder if part of it is thinking about with those edge buildings, does it have to be a cinder block material? Is there another material that we could consider? And then one last thing for that porosity, I'm also wondering with those concession buildings, is it possible to put outboard windows on them so there could be a possible vendor relationship with visitors to this area when the Memorial Stadium isn't being activated? So it could increase that activity, particularly near this in the South Overlook lawn and that restrooms and concession building there, which goes to Phoebe's question about if there's a way to further activate that area. So I'll pause there. Those are my comments in relationship to kind of opening up that area.
And Kate, there's one thing that I do want to ask commissioners if we'd be open to asking the team this question for clarification. I think in that conversation about what the engaged students said, particularly the BIPOC youth engagement, I think some of us heard that they wanted the physical security, but didn't hear that as wanted visual lack of access. And others of us heard that they didn't want the visual access. So are you all comfortable with us clarifying with the team what the students said in that engagement?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Great. So we would love to hear whether what you heard from the students was that they wanted physical security, but that there was an openness to visual permeability, or if the students had specifically asked for a lack of visual permeability as part of that safety.
So I will try to answer that question for you. So the physical is absolutely something we heard that they certainly want a barrier to protect, sort of the people moving back and forth between the space. In terms of the visual, I think that was probably not as clear. I think the visual really is more a reflection of what I'll call the business, the business side of it, and coming from the administration of SPS in terms of the ability to control tickets, if you will, and ticket sales, so that you're not basically allowing people to, in effect, stand outside the fence and watch what they should be paying for. And I guess that would apply in theory to the other stuff too, but certainly that was coming from SPS primarily. For their high school events. But I think the security issue, at least from what I heard, and I certainly would stand to be corrected by Brad or others that were in the meeting, was much more about the physical than the visual.
And I would say that the south side of this stadium is entirely physical, visual, full lead into the concourses, even with those food trucks serving both sides. It has a lot of the things that you were just talking about in terms of like Kate's idea of having that thing serve both inside the stadium and outside the stadium. Like we're sort of doing that in the south, but we're not doing it on the west. And that's the disparity that I'm picking up on is, yeah. Why do we have one level of permeability and safety and lack of visual penetration on that side, but then on the west side, we're going with a much different solution.
Yeah, and I think that the answer to that is tied directly to the elevated berm view angle created from that elevation to be able to basically look directly into the field of play. I think that's the best answer I can give you, is that's what drove what I'll call the design solution that we presented.
Yeah, that's correct, Lance. So on the south, the sight lines are such that you could stand outside the fence line and you can't see the field. On the west, now that we do have that elevated berm, you could stand up on that berm and see down into the field, which is something that SVS did. The business side of it.
So I'm curious if a lower solution that still allows visual access to the activity at the kind of top of the berm, around the restrooms and concessions, I'm thinking like, can a seat wall block enough of that view of the field? And
Which is the south solution.
with a seat wall, well, not a wall though, not a fencing having.
It's the back row of the south concourse. It is a pony wall. It's
Right.
3 feet tall or whatever, but that completely blocks the views of the field from concourse and beyond.
So could you do a similar solution on the west, so such that you're not blocking everything? And I would also ask, can you see pieces of the field? I mean, if I can't see what's truly happening in a game, but I can see a tiny bit of movement from time to time, then I'm not likely to stand there to watch the whole game. But I might get some of that energy
Drawn
and
in.
feeling, that makes me want to be there.
I
Okay.
think
Well, I
the
think
answer is, yeah, we can look at what I'll call interior solutions that are inside the fence that potentially protect the field visual. I think that's what we have to study. We have to study those sight lines a little bit more. We looked at a lot of the other sight lines early on, but we haven't fully, I think, explored the berm sight line. But I do think that we can go to the next level in terms of investigating an interior, I will call it an interior stadium visual barrier idea, instead of trying to create that at the perimeter. It's something we can look at.
Thank you. And Zubin, I know that, so this is stepping away from that west entry visibility. I feel like we've covered that nicely, but it still relates to your broader question about access all around. Do you want to speak to the third? I know that you've spoken to the third avenue.
Yeah. So I think just to kind of repeat, to pick up with some of my questioning from last time, I think it would be great to kind of, have the view kind of coming from the south and seeing how that continues through the space, and then just having the drawing of how the whole, having the whole room together, and how what's going on in the west of the stadium and northwest of the stadium kind of relate to everything else. And I guess I would just repeat my recommendation that we have kind of a one-time shot here to fix that northwest corner that always gets so congested and is just a nightmare to navigate during large events, not to mention all the visual obstructions. So I think the flyovers that we saw showed us that that's happening. So I think just kind of continuing to study that and, how things flow through there and then into the kind of plaza in front of the ballet beyond, okay, so I think the next,
I do have
Oh,
one
yeah, go
more
ahead. Yeah.
surrounding area.
Yeah.
This was slide 75 in the draft. If you could flip to that, I'm not positive if it was the same in the final.
What was the?
It's a view, it's the proposed east parking lot looking south. It's not this slide, but it's the east parking lot looking south view. It should show a view of the Space Needle. And it's as with approaching before the memorial wall.
And the blades of grass.
and it has kind of trees shaded out.
So right around Harrison. That, where Harrison terminates with,
Put that in the chat.
Yeah, I'll just copy paste it into the chat.
right around there.
It's a view from,
Who's driving?
let's see.
There.
Okay, I just posted the image in the chat. So it has people on. Do you see the image in the chat so that we can pull up the same?
Yes, yeah, I'm trying to find that one. Barb, do you
It's,
happen to know exactly what page
um,
that's on?
it is just, it should be close to the last image in the sequence. So I think if you go to the next one, I believe that's going to be it. It's just to the south of the memorial as if you were walking along that walkway. So I want to say it's 89. No, doggone it.
There you go.
There we go.
There
That's
There
it.
we go. Found it. Thank you.
Okay, so that image on the bottom right, I think demonstrates the point. So really the desire being that you have this view to the space, you have the stadium, you have view to Space Needle, you have vegetation that blocks you from the cars. And I feel that what's shown right here blocks the Space Needle, but leaves a lot of view to the car by just being kind of trunks of trees. I acknowledge that there could be septet challenges if you had maybe lower kind of shrubs on the right side of that image, but something lower feels like it would be appropriate so that you can see the Space Needle, and then ideally you would have more street tree and blocking something that is blocking the cars to our left a little bit more clearly. So really just having those orientation views to the Space Needle at any points when we're able, at any points when we're showing approach, would be the hope. Does anyone else have comments on that? Agreement, disagreement?
Agreed.
It's gonna be tough. It's tight. I think the concourse will be a different view because you'll be to the right of all that vegetation. And so you actually will get a lot of that Space Needle view, and it's just the walkway where you are essentially still in the parking lot that you will experience the parking lot. So maybe since you're in the parking lot, it's okay to see the cars, but I think the concourse is probably the more significant version of this diagram. I don't know, Barb,
Yeah.
maybe that was intent.
Can I respond? I want to respect your process here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Okay, okay. You know, this is one of those classic conditions of do you need to see the big view all the time? And so one of the things that we are trying to find the balance between is between taking advantage of a fairly narrow north-south space that is the eastern edge experientially of the Seattle Center treed campus, and trying to bring that sense of the treed campus out to that edge. I think the point about sequentially as you move through the center, views open up to these amazing icons, and then they close down and then they open back up. Having said that, one of the things that we are exploring in this particular area is on the right-hand side of this walkway that you're looking at, is instead of doing lower trees, doing taller columnar trees. And I say that because the real issue here on this side of the stadium and the east edge of Seattle Center in terms of the sense of this campus is an issue of what I'm going to call landscape scale. And so using taller columnar trees is going to help us get up with trees that have a canopy that you can see underneath. So you could see the base of the Space Needle, so you know it's there. You can see MOPOP, but you have that larger landscape scale, which small trees are challenged to hold the space and hold their own at in this area with this much paving. So anyhow, that's how we're thinking about it.
Great. That's really helpful, Barbara. And I would say just to other commissioners, so you can agree with me or disagree, and to build it into our recommendations. Basically, my proposed recommendation would be that just having clarity on where we're wanting to see views and where we're not. I think even just a mapping of full view, partial view will tell that maybe dappling story, because I think it's absolutely true that we're balancing this goal for tree canopy and goal for views to the Space Needle. And if there are clear areas where you want each of those, I think that would just have a great clarity from a design perspective next time we see it. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, because I didn't get to say it before, I think 100% there should be trees there. I think it would be remiss to not put them. If you look at the existing parking lot, we're not doing anything to that parking lot. It's a massive piece of asphalt that's just staying there for, we don't know for how long. So that edge should certainly have trees. And I think the columnar option does have good sense to it. It also can, have some kind of structure there that emulates, the form of the, Space Needle or what have you, right? And it kind of has those kind of interstitial views between. So I just want to advocate for that. So in agreement. I mean, I think having the mapping of the views is good, but you can't, 100%, codify that. But something that just says, this is where, we're marking it and this is where it really opens up, would be nice. But I think the more important part is definitely having a treed frontage there.
Great. Thank you, Phoebe. I agree with that. Appreciate you discussing it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Designated role of timekeeper, we have 20 minutes left.
Yeah, so why don't we kind of prioritize the topics here? I think the stakeholder involvement was a big one that folks wanted to talk about. Should we jump to that?
I've been talking quite a bit. Does anyone want to start us off on that? Okay, I'll start us off on that, and then if anyone wants to add anything. So I just want to see continued stakeholder involvement for programmatic considerations. So that includes tribal coordination, or how that's actually affecting the programmatic, how the spatial organization is actually reflecting the programmatic desires of the engaged, of the tribal coordination, I think is super important, and how that visible acknowledgement of Indigenous history starts to layer itself on the site. Super interested in seeing that as the design moves forward. And then also, I think from a stakeholder involvement for programmatic considerations, just continuing to ensure that the existing groups that program that space, particularly I think about on the fountain side, just ensuring that there's a very clear plan for where they locate themselves, what their operations look like, where their trash is, really a lot of the things that they've managed over many, many years on this campus. We want to make sure that this is going to be seamless and isn't going to create a lot of eyesores because maybe their operations aren't as seamless as they have become over many years of practice. So really bringing them in on the design process so that they can so that this can really be a space that's designed for them as well.
Okay. Anything else on stakeholder engagement?
We touched on it a little bit with views and priorities as far as the games and things.
Maybe one just small comment. I think in our Q&A last time, something kind of came out about how when you guys had engaged with the students, it hadn't been so much around the topic of aesthetics of the project. It was more about all of these, operation issues and programmatic issues. So I think that, I would like to have a recommendation that students explicitly also are asked about the form of the project a little bit too.
About what?
About the, the aesthetics of the project, about the way it looks, like sort of explicitly asked to kind of comment on that in future stakeholder engagement, because sometimes I feel like especially young people don't even necessarily understand that that's something they can talk about. And we've had a lot of stakeholder engagement with community groups where we hear comments that's very opposite to our instincts, as designers, like, bathrooms shouldn't be so white and austere. It feels alienating to me as a certain kind of, user of this space. And we're like, we love shiny white bathrooms, so I think just having like the explicit engagement with students about the actual look of the project, I think would be a good recommendation, if you guys agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We did have a note last time that they were gonna have a public outreach day at the Armory on some Wednesday.
And to the extent to which they may have done that work.
Yeah.
So whatever work that has occurred,
Yes.
Lance and the team, in addition to this sort of directive that you're receiving today about upcoming stuff, if you could package that all into one series of summary items at your next meeting, that would be helpful.
Yep.
I
Okay,
had a comment about stakeholder engagement that was in relationship to the public art programming. So just wanted to flag that as another topic to discuss that is connected.
Okay. Well, yeah, why don't we shift to art? I think that was another big topic. Does that make sense? Okay. Kate, do you want to just keep rolling?
Sure. Yeah, related to bringing in, and unless it's happened already, discussions with students about aesthetics of the building. I know in presentations that we've heard that there's a goal for the memorial to really serve as a space beyond just sports activities, but also for cultural activities for the students. And in the last presentation, there was a lot of discussion about potential art treatments in the memorial that was student-led, which sounds really exciting. And within the stadium. So I was just wondering about that because about opportunities for how to coordinate that so it really is a robust effort, since there's so many high schools that call this memorial theirs. How to bring in students from all these various schools to get their input, so there is that sense of co-ownership. And so I'd like to encourage the project team, much like in public projects where there's, for example, a community engagement artist or a teaching artist that gets hired to help facilitate a design process with a community group, to consider doing that to help lead whatever that design process is with the students, perhaps in collaboration with teachers at the school. I was just wondering, strategically how you would otherwise be able to do that, since there are so many schools involved, and it could be a great way for students to kind of get more robustly involved in that design process. So I know that's outside of the public art purview, but one other note on that is just to encourage, it's a $25 million project, to consider potentially devoting a % of that for public art opportunities as well within the facility that could perhaps dovetail with student efforts. So that was sort of my comment in relationship to stakeholders, is just really hoping there's a way to help support the efforts of the creators within the schools as well that are connected. And then just a comment in terms of public art for the exterior, for the western edge. I know we talked about the west edge, the Harrison corridor, and potentially the Mopop corner for all areas for the percent for art. And I just would encourage the project team to really, I know we have a great lighting designer involved, and there's foundation work that's occurring. And so I'd love to encourage the project team to consider carrying the costs for the footings, electrical, or other infrastructure things that could then help with the artist just focusing on above grade design for the percent for art. So those were my comments for the public art plan.
Okay, great. Anyone else on art?
I don't think we get the percent of the stadium costs. We only get the percent of the city stuff, right?
For the
Correct,
portion outside of the
Yeah.
stadium. So her recommendation was also within the stadium doing some of this.
Okay, how about we switch to transit access? I feel like that's a big one we haven't touched on. Kevin, do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, Zubin, I can start if that's okay. And I think we talked about some of this at the previous meeting, but yeah, again, I'm sort of struck by, and I'm not conflating the scale of these two projects at all, but when Climate Pledge Arena was done, there was a tremendous focus on redoing the whole streetscape on First, putting the bike lane in, transit, D-line improvements on Mercer, First, and Queen Anne. It's pretty intuitive about how to get to the west side of the center on, transit or bike. This is really anchoring the east side of the center, the northeast side. And as Lance pointed out, there's been a stadium there for a long time, right? I mean, it's not a new thing. But a lot of people, there's the parking lot, and that is what it is. And I know it's staying there. But thinking about high school students, for example, a lot of high school students can't drive either because they're too young or their parents won't let them use the car. So how are people, whereas they all have transit passes. So I think we just need to make sure that the access to and from the stadium from transit stops is really intuitive and clearly marked. If people are biking to events at the stadium, is there safe, secure bike parking? Where is it? So those are things that I think just need to be, it should be part of our recommendation. So those, I think it's pedestrian access to and from transit and bike access and parking are two things that come to mind, because again, those were really improved on the west side of the arena as part of the Climate Pledge Arena. And I think that should just be part of this project as well, to the extent appropriate. So that's my comment.
I would add to that, Kevin, to and from planned light rail stations.
I've
Yeah,
seen
totally agree.
a couple of diagrams that really took that forward. Is that something we're talking about? Or I know the first round we asked about that, what is the pedestrian, not just within our block, but to those places. And then I remember seeing a diagram that spelled out both the Republican stop and the Denny stop and the light rail stop. I thought that they did a rather good job on that front.
And I think there's also been a really good job of access to the monorail now, right? Because that's a huge part of getting people to Climate Pledge Arena. So I think that's been a good improvement at the center as well. So I think it's, but obviously the future light rail plan is important too, so.
And commissioners, you probably don't know this, but there is a proposal in the 2025 budget to start significant upgrades to the monorail station within the center. That might be one opportunity for David and the team at Seattle Center to look at and you're probably doing this anyway, but how is the work there been trued up with the changes that are proposed to Memorial Stadium to advance connectivity and wayfinding for the new realized facility. So
Yeah, and so I think it's that. I think it is mapped well here, but I think it's really about understanding what are those funded, connected projects?
Yeah.
Where are the challenges, where are the access challenges between those, really being a collaborator in identifying where those gaps in access could be, that projects aren't already taking on from an access improvements perspective.
Yeah, Molly, I think that's a really good way to think about it. Like, one, there's ways people can get to the center now. And so are those clearly marked, from those points to the stadium and vice versa? And then are there other improvements in addition that are important to think about, like the monorail thing that Michael just mentioned, for example, and how do we leverage that? So I think that's a good way to kind of frame that.
We can lap a little bit over into our 10 o'clock.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else on transportation? Kate, were you going to say something?
Oh, no, I was just going to say I have to leave shortly after 10.
Okay. Well, I think we actually touched on most of the topics I laid out, maybe not exactly in that order, but I think we kind of touched most of those things. Are there anything else we want to talk about?
Can I go back to the topic?
Yeah,
Sorry, I should have brought this up earlier. It's about community engagement. Sometimes I feel like it's an issue of equity, of asking students to come down to Seattle Center to give their thoughts and opinions. And to give some background, Seattle Public School students, 55% of them are students of color and 30% of them are on free reduced lunch. So I think it's important to meet these students where they're at. So can we have community engagement going into the schools during lunchtime when the students are available? Because after school, some students are working a job to support their families or having to take care of their siblings because their parents are working. So can we get a larger scope and range of reaching these students by going into the schools?
Great idea, thank you.
I think we had a comment also about maybe at the games, right, for the people who are going to the games.
Yep. Okay.
Those are your users, current users. Hopefully we can expand that range.
Okay. So I guess should I take a stab at summarizing the recommendations?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I have here is strengthen and clarify the relationship between the fountain and the stadium. I think we all think the berm is overall positive development, but we want to strike the right balance between porosity on the west side while still, kind of managing the views to the field, but just kind of studying that west side area more so that it has more of the character of the south side. Is that a fair way to kind of phrase that? Okay. I think similarly, we heard that some of the buildings seem to become kind of more westerly facing, and kind of similar comment of turning our back to the fountain. So continuing to look at the materiality and expression of the buildings themselves to find that right balance of porosity and security. Continue to study the project's connection to the rest of the Seattle Center. So in particular, kind of show the entire room of the large rectangle and views from approaching from the south and the north, in addition to all the views we kind of already have. I think, Molly, let me know if this kind of gets to your recommendations about the views. But so increased clarity over visibility of Seattle Center icons, like where we have them and where we don't. And then asking for some kind of diagram that explains a holistic strategy of where those views are present. And then finding the right scale and type of trees and other design components to support that overall design intent. But,
yeah,
for summary. Okay. Then moving into the engagement piece, I think we want to ensure that all engagement is kind of meeting students where they are. So going into schools, possibly setting up engagement events at events themselves at the stadium. Specific to art, I think we want to find ways to engage students in the art program, whether directly or interacting with, the public artists on the project. Does that kind of encapsulate what you're talking about, Kate?
Yeah, or I know there's a big separation in terms of the funding streams for the public art project and what's happening inside the memorial. What I'm suggesting is considering having a coordinating teaching artist involved within the memorial project, could be involved in the public art program or not.
Okay. Okay. And then what else do we have with student engagement? I think that was it. Yeah. Okay. And then also had here continuing to engage existing operational stakeholder groups to make sure that they'll continue to operate seamlessly in the new spatial configuration. And let's see. Kate, or he also mentioned encourage the project team to look at the feasibility of carrying the cost of infrastructural items of the public art component in the project budget to the extent that makes sense. And then finally, I think transit access. So recognizing that this project is a kind of new anchor on the east side of the center, continue to study pedestrian routes and bike routes to and from the site, particularly to future light rail, monorail, and making sure those routes are clearly identified and highly legible. That kind of corporate, yeah. That's that. Yeah.
Continued Indigenous engagement.
Sorry, that was the one I missed. Yeah.
Going back to the kind of focus on the fountain, I heard Kate also say that those corner buildings should, if possible, open up to the exterior.
Or at least be considered on both sides, right?
Yep.
What does it do to the center, but can it also serve the center? Either in art wall or in bending or in prettiness, right? Like,
Yeah,
Okay.
if it can't be pierced through via programming, if there can be material choices made to encourage that friendliness.
All right. Well, I don't think I need to restate all of those, right? Well,
Hence the beauty of having this recorded.
yeah, we'll clean up the language in the minutes, but so I think there's no conditions today, right? So do we have to move to vote or
You just
roll into it? All right. So I think we're voting to approve the schematic design review of the Memorial Stadium project with the recommendations as just discussed. So I will start, I guess, since I'm at the end of the table. Maybe that's not the proper form, but I vote to approve.
I vote to approve.
Vote to approve.
love it.
Phoebe,
Yes, vote to approve.
thank you. Kate,
Vote to approve.
great. And finally, Kevin.
I vote to approve with the recommendations.
Excellent, thank you. Great, well, thank you, commissioners. I know that, having to bisect this part of today from our last meeting was a little awkward and difficult for everyone, but I really appreciate the team and the commissioners stepping up for a little different way of doing business. I think that the recommendations today will really serve this project well, and we're really looking forward to see how this all comes together when we hear from you again.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thanks,
See
you
you.
guys.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Commissioners, we're have commission business from 10 until 10:30, including our going under the table for 2 minutes at 10:17. Phoebe and Kevin, please go under the table at home.
I'll just go under my blanket.
I have bad knees. If I have bad knees, can I just like sort of crouch under the table?
Hold a piece of paper over here.
Okay. Sounds
And in the
good.
doorway.
I will do something.
Well, because
I just quickly have to say, I was at Memorial Stadium last week for my daughter's soccer game, and all the bathrooms were closed at that time because it was a 7 o'clock game. All in Seattle Center, like everything was closed, like even the Center House, like the Armory, closing down everything. So my husband's like, "Why aren't you just going to go at the stadiums?" I'm like, "Okay, fine, you're right." So I go to the stadium. Bathrooms are also closed at the stadium, and then somebody says, "Oh no, there are the bathrooms open. They're open like within the locker rooms, and you have to get a code." And I went back there, and it was so awful.